and welcome to today's lesson, American Government in 10 Minutes, the basics of democracy and the basics of American government. Okay, so let's first start off with the basics of a democracy. Now, what is a democracy? Well, a democracy usually allows power to rest in the citizens or the people's hands. So usually citizens have the power to vote for an elected official or at least have a voice in who they want elected, seen in America with the Electoral College. A couple concepts of democracy are majority rules. So that means when a citizen or elected official goes to vote on a bill or for an office, they at least have to have 51% of people or citizens agree with what they agree on. Um, but with majority rule, you have to have minority rights. So minority rights are you have to make sure that the majority does not take over the minority. So that's where a bunch of the Bill of Rights and some of the amendments from the Constitution come into play to protect the minority. A couple other concepts of a democracy are due process, so everyone can have a fair trial, and also everyone can be equal before the law. So it doesn't matter your race, your religion, your gender, your sex, your height, your weight, you will be seen equal in the eyes of law. Now, there are two types of democracy, direct and representative. The first one we'll talk about today is direct. Direct it gives the citizens a better opportunity to voice their opinions. It's an easier way for citizens to present a problem they are facing. But direct democracy is usually seen at a local scale at town meetings or school board, where they can talk face to face with the people that are voting on a particular item or bill. Um, this is a small portion of democracy, but majority of the types of democracy that we see are representative. A representative democracy um, is where citizens, if they have a common problem, um, and there are so many of them to the point where it's hard to talk to face them. This is where representative democracy comes into play because it allows for the citizens to elect officials, and then they will. So, say you have 1,000 people, and every 100 people, you have one representative. It will take what the 100 people are feeling, and then go to a meeting, and they will discuss about how the majority of their 100 people feel, and that's where they will figure out what to do with a bill or what to do in like any like congressional office. And with representative democracy, it's not as easy to voice opinions and concerns because you can't talk face to face. And representative democracy is usually seen at the in the American government. It's the best example in today's society because representative democracy is what the American government was built around. Now, American government and democracy. Capitalism is the main political ideology when it comes to an economic system in America. So capitalism, what it is it's the thought about private property and ownership that people can own their things without having government intervention. So capitalism is also based on the law of supply and demand. So that means um, if an item is wanted enough, um, the cost of it will increase. If an item is not needed or is not popular at the moment, the product of that will decrease because it's not in demand. That's the law of supply and demand. Um, and then with private property and ownership of like producing of goods, the owners they compete. That's one of the main focuses of capitalism is they compete against each other to make a profit. This profit then in turns funds their production, covers like cost and what it make like how much it is to make this specific item. And then capitalism also allows for taxation of income and capital gains tax. So whenever there's just a sale or like an investment in a company, the government will take taxes from them. And then once, like I said, a perfect example of capitalism, United States of America. Moving on. Okay, now we will actually get into the discussion of the American government, um, particularly the history of it, how it came to be, how it's divided, and the branches of it, and what those branches do for the American government. Okay, so first, history of the government. It first started with the American Revolution. So for a couple of years, more than a couple, probably like 20 so years, Great Britain, the homeland, and the 13 colonies had very high tension, probably due to some of the acts, like the Stamp Act, that put a tax on every paper product, so newspapers, birth certificates, things like that. In retaliation of some of the acts, there was the creation of the Boston Tea Party, where some of the natives, not the natives, but some of the colonists thought it was right to dress up as Indians and go and dump a whole bunch of tea into the harbor. So tensions were really high between them. Well, the tension finally bursted open with the beginning of the American Revolution, which started in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts on April 19th, 1775, when some British armies and a small militia started fighting against each other. It wasn't until a year and a couple months later that on July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was ratified. It had been worked on for a couple days, and then what is ratified on as what we know today as Independence Day because of the Declaration of Independence. But I'm not going to go into depth of like what happened during the American Revolution, but I will say the Revolutionary War ended in 1781, but fighting did not actually end until 1783, and so after this, after the the colonists got their independence, they have to form a government. That's something automatically that has to happen to keep peace. So they first came out with what was known as the Articles of Confederation. This is once again the first try at the Americans creating a government, but the Articles of Confederation was thought to be more of a firm league of friendship rather than an actual constitution or government papers. There was a couple problems with this, with the Article of Confederation. First, could not levy taxes, so the Congress could not impose any tax. Also, Congress could create laws, but they had no way of enforcing them, so they didn't have a president or an executive branch to do that. And then after this happened for a couple months, they knew that they had to create something else. So the framers of the Constitution, they knew they needed a better government. So they decided to meet in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention, where they discussed for I think a couple weeks on what we know as today as the Constitution. Now the Constitution, let's get into that. So the Constitution, it was signed on September 17th, 1787. First ratified by Delaware, then Pennsylvania, and the third was New Jersey. The Constitution consists of the preamble, Bill of Rights, and the 7 articles that explain the workings of the government. It was in the people were divided when they were going to write this. You had the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. Anti-Federalists, they wanted a couple things. They wanted the Bill of Rights, and we don't see the Bill of Rights added until 1791. That was one thing that they were majorly against, but the Constitution did pass through because it is here today. And since then, there have been 27 amendments into the Constitution. So the preamble. Let's discuss that. First, we the people of the United States. Everyone that resides in the United States. That's what it means. In order to form a more perfect union. So to make the nation as great as it can possibly be. Establish justice. So to make sure that every victim or anyone that's accused of a crime, they can make sure that they get either what they deserve or help, basically, in the law. Ensure domestic tranquility. This is to make sure that states or citizens are not getting into fights, not breaking out in war like we see in the Civil War. That's what insurance of domestic tranquility means. And then provide for the common defense. So a military. So we have a standing army at the moment. We've always had a standing army, and that's basically just to protect the citizens. And then promote the general welfare. So like public administration projects, parks, anything that helps aid America, not in so much as a beautification project, but more as in to make sure the citizens are feeling accepted and that it's a nice environment to live and raise your kids in. And then secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity. That right there, that's freedom to make sure that who's living right now and their future kids, future generations are free. And then do ordain and establish a constitution for the United States of America. That's the preamble. Is not so much. It's not a given law. Like you can't go and like, oh well, I established justice because I aided someone that was injured. And I hurt the guy that did it. That you can't use that because the preamble is more of a way of it's why we want not independence but a more perfect union. That's why. Now after the preamble we have the Bill of Rights. Once again, not added until 1791. Now let's discuss. We'll first discuss the first 5 amendment rights. First, probably one of the most well known is the freedom of religion, speech, and the press, the right to a peaceful protest, and the right to petition the government. The second, the right to bear arms. That's pretty given. Anyone can own a gun. Third, no soldier should occupy a residence during peacetime and wartime, and they can't occupy without the consent of the owner. 4, no unreasonable search and seizure, and cannot obtain a warrant without probable cause. These 4 through I think 6 are for people that are facing charges to make sure that they are not underrepresented. Underrepresented. And then 5, due process before the law, so everyone can have a trial. And they also have the right to not incriminate themselves, and double jeopardy shall not be applied. Now, the Bill of Rights amendments 6 through 10. So the 6th Amendment is the right to a fair and speedy public trial. The defense, the person being charged with a crime, also has the right to question his accuser. And he can also or she can also have a legal aid, so an attorney. The 7th Bill of Rights amendment is the right for civil cases to be tried by the federal government, specifically the Supreme Court. So, for example, Roe v. Wade. Number 8, no excessive fines and no cruel or unusual punishment. Number 9, a person has rights even if they are not specified in the Constitution. And 10, rights not stated by the federal government in the Constitution is then given to the states or people. Now, let's get into the categories of American government and how it breaks down. So the American government is divided into 3 separate categories: federal, state, local. Let's first talk about local and then build our way up to federal. So, local government. Usually made up of cities, towns, and counties. Each county has a court that presides over all criminal activity, adoptions, divorce, things like that. Each county does have a court, so they won't have to go outside of that county. Cities and towns ran by a mayor, kind of like a president, but doesn't have the power of a president. But local government, they cannot make laws, but they can elect representatives to voice popular opinions at the state level. Moving on. State government. smaller version of the federal government. It has a bicameral legislative, which means a state Congress is made up of a Senate and the House of Representatives. Has a governor that signs bills into law, very, very, very similar to what the president does. And the governor also has the right to declare a state of emergency for their state. Um, the state government has the right to make laws due to the 10th Amendment, as I stated before in the Constitution. State governments can issue birth certificates, driver's license, and occupational license, such as attorney or a teacher license. Also, state government sometimes does not have the funding for certain things, so they will look to the federal government for funding, especially in like public administration projects, so roads, bridges, parks, things like that. Now, the big kahuna, federal government. Federal government, they can override state laws. So if a state puts in, like, let's say, gay marriage, that was a big thing a couple years ago. A couple states had allowed for gay couples to marry, but a good portion of American states not. Well, the Supreme Court decided that it would be unconstitutional for them not to allow people to marry, so they overrid what the states wanted. Federal government can also levy taxes and regulates the worth of money. They can declare war and they can maintain an army. And then the three branches of the American government are executive, legislative, and judicial. Now, the executive branch. This is the president. It contains the office of the president, the office of the vice president, the president's cabinet, and other federal agencies. For example, the Department of Education and the Department of Homeland Security. The president has the ability to sign bills into law or reject the bill if they don't care for or they don't think it's good enough to be a law. The executive branch's job is to enforce laws. And if a president is to die or to be impeached, the vice president will then become the president. Now, legislative branch. The legislative branch is basically Congress. That's all it is. Congress is once again made up of two houses, a bicameral legislative. The House of Representatives. Let's talk about like how a bill in the House of Representatives comes about. So when a bill is introduced to Congress, it must first be heard in a committee of congressmen, of selected congressmen. If they agree to introduce this bill, it will first go to the House of Representatives, where they will vote on it. And then if it is a positive vote, if more than 51% says yes, it will move on to Senate. If 51% no, then it will die in the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives for impeachment, they are the ones that bring charges against the president or any other elected official that could be facing impeachment. The Senate is after the bill is passed in the House, it will then move to the Senate, where they can also vote on it. If it is passed, it will arrive on the president's desk to hopefully be signed. If it doesn't, it dies in the Senate. Now, with impeachment, the Senate are the ones that they try the accused, they try the president, or they try the elected official that has the impeachment charges brought against them. If the accused of an official is an official, the president of the Senate will be the judge. The vice president is actually the president of the Senate, so he or she will be giving the final thoughts on an elected official that's being impeached. The legislative branch, the Congress, is actually the branch that can declare war and levy taxes. The president cannot do that legally, kind of. They do have a loophole where if the president needs to, if it's like an emergency, then he could, but the Congress would not be very happy about that. Now, the judicial branch. The judicial branch is the Supreme Court. Once again, that's what it's made up of. The Supreme Court has 9 judges, or justices as they are called, and then one of these justices is a Chief Justice, and they are the leader of the Supreme Court. They're the ones that usually talk. The Supreme Court will usually hear over 5,000 cases a year. Once again, these are probably majority of them civil or might be criminal. If the justices deem a case necessary, they will collect all official records and papers from lower government. The Supreme Court does not have a jury. They just use the findings from before, compile them, and then hand them out. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of the case, they can make it a statutory law. And the last thing is, if a president is to be impeached, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court becomes the last person to say what will happen with these charges. This is a poster. This just basically is a overview of what the executive, legislative, and judicial branch does. It lists like what they're made up in their jobs. Like executive is to enforce the law, the legislative is to make the laws, and judicial is to interpret the laws. Well, let's cover one last thing. Political parties. There are two major political parties in America. The Democrats. Their main beliefs are abortion should be legal. Gay marriage should also be legal. They would like stricter gun laws. Opportunities for financial aid for students that are pursuing post-secondary education. And there should also be affordable and accessible healthcare. Now, Republicans, they kind of they differ. They differ in a perspective of their beliefs. Republicans believe that abortion should be illegal and that a fetus at conception is considered a human being, and that is murder. And then marriage. Marriage is between a man and a woman. Anyone should be able to own a gun. They have limited involvement in education. And they also maintain the capitalist views of private ownership and the competing between hospitals and healthcare insurance. Then the last thing is, there's another group of individuals that do not necessarily align with either Democrat or Republicans, but they do accept views from both parties. These individuals are termed independents. So they take what they like from the Republican side, and they also take from what they like from the Democratic side. And that's basically an overview of the American government. I hope you learned something, and this is longer than 10 minutes. It's actually 21 minutes, but you got a good lesson, so have a nice day.